Business Insider. Prominent Bernie Sanders supporters are calling on Joe Biden to drop out of the 2020 race over Tara Reade's sexual assault allegation. By Eliza Ryman. Weeks after former Vice President Joe Biden was accused of sexually assaulting a former aide in 1993, Senator Bernie Sanders endorsed Biden for president. Many of Sanders' supporters were disappointed with his decision to drop out of the race and suggested they might not vote for Biden in the general election. Some of them have done more than just suggest that they might not vote for Biden. As new evidence emerges corroborating Reade's allegations, some prominent Sanders supporters are calling on Biden to drop out of the race. If we can't get Bernie to do the right thing, at least we can try to force Biden out without Bernie's help. There is simply no moral justification for Biden to continue as the presumptive nominee, Claire Sandberg, Sanders' 2020 National Organizing Director, tweeted on Tuesday. Out of respect for survivors and for the good of the country, he should withdraw from the race. Personally, I think we need a two-pronged attack. I think we need to put pressure on Bernie and on Biden. Just days after Senator Bernie Sanders ended his 2020 Democratic presidential bid, he appeared on an April 13th live stream with former Vice President Joe Biden and issued a strong endorsement of the presumptive nominee. It's weird that Business Insider says ended his 2020 Democratic presidential bid instead of suspended his 2020 Democratic presidential bid. Sometimes the brainwashing is more subtle, sometimes it's less subtle. This took place just weeks after Tara Reade, a former aide in Biden's Senate office in the early 1990s, came forward with new allegations that Biden sexually assaulted her in a Capitol Hill corridor in 1993. Reade was one of 7 women who came forward last year to allege that Biden had touched or kissed them inappropriately. Biden's campaign has repeatedly denied Reade's assault claims. It wasn't me. It wasn't me. But as new evidence has emerged corroborating Reade's allegations, several prominent Sanders supporters and former aides have broken with Sanders and called on Biden to drop out of the 2020 race. Claire Sandberg, Sanders' 2020 National Organizing Director, on Tuesday called on Biden to drop out of the race over the Reade allegations. Now is the time to deal with the ramifications of Tara Reade's accusations, not this fall. There is simply no moral justification for Biden to continue as the presumptive nominee, she tweeted. Out of respect for survivors and for the good of the country, he should withdraw from the race. Peter Dow, a Hillary Clinton aide turned vocal Sanders supporter, there's a little subtlety there too. Let's recast it. Peter Dow, a Hillary Clinton aide turned Sanders supporter, called on Biden over the weekend to end his presidential bid because of Reade's allegations and said Sanders and other candidates should re-enter the race. We lose all moral authority if we embrace the lesser of 2 accused rapists, he wrote. I included his tweet in its entirety a few shows ago, so go back and watch that one. Nick Brana, Sanders' 2016 National Outreach Director and the founder of Movement for a People's Party, urged the Democratic National Committee over the weekend to force Biden out of the race and win with Bernie, adding the hashtag #DropOutBiden. Dear DNC, you have 2 options. Number 1, pull Biden now and win with Bernie. Number 2, keep Biden, re-elect Trump, and admit that suppressing progressives is the true purpose of your party, he wrote, retweeting a Saturday Political story examining a recording of Reade's mother alleging her daughter had problems with a prominent senator. The People for Bernie Twitter account run by Sanders supporters tweeted on Tuesday, Joe Biden's candidacy is imploding. Jimmy Dore just had Nick Brana on his show based on the tweets that this article references.
The news shows are also starting to call out the squad and Bernie for being complicit with the corporate giveaway and the biggest transfer of wealth in the history of our country. And you know why? Because they are complicit. And so you go on to say they have to befriend neoliberal committee chairs and party leaders for committee assignments and to get their legislation heard. They have to horse trade with moderates. Which is why AOC, none of them will call out Nancy Pelosi, and which is why Bernie won't call out Chuck Schumer. That's why. And until they do that, nothing will happen, which is why nothing is happening, which means that they're not nice people. They're self-interested career climbers, including fucking Bernie. Bernie's looking out for his committee assignments. His own press secretary said, or surrogate said that he ran his campaign as, from a point of view of I want to keep my senatorial appointments, committee appointments, not from I want to win this race. So that's self-interest. That's not Bernie being nice. In fact, that's what people got to get over. This isn't about Bernie just doesn't understand he needs to fight more. Bernie doesn't fight more because he understands the consequences and he doesn't want them. He doesn't want to be like Ralph Nader. He doesn't want the wrath of Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, or the establishment. He really doesn't. Am I right about that?
It's true. It's true. And I go on to kind of identify some of the other institutional forces. And so I don't know if you plan on...
Here, I'll show them. You say they have to spend personal time with and win votes from the establishment Democrats who were easy to criticize from the outside. These dynamics quickly take the edge off their critiques of the party and their colleagues, and it waters down their messages and platforms, which is why you'll see AOC wave her arms and scream about the stimulus bill while voting for it, and also at the same time saying it's a joke and an insult of a bill, but I'm not going to call out anybody who votes for it. Those two things are incongruent, and they show exactly what Nick is pointing out here. That's exactly what has happened to AOC already. She's going to scream and rail against the Republicans, but she'll never scream and rail against Nancy Pelosi or the other Democrats who are actually the people she has the influence over. Or on. You go on to say that's why Bernie almost never, and this is the fact, ask Tim Canova, that's why Bernie almost never supports primary challenges against incumbent Democrats in Congress, and why even AOC is backing away from creating a corporate-free caucus in the House and supporting the primary challenges she said she would 2 years ago. So Cenk Uygur's already calling out AOC for this kind of bullshit. I've been calling her out for it for a while. Now you're calling her out. I hope other progressive shows start calling her out for it, because this is exactly the opposite of. So now people like AOC won't even back now. So let me throw it to you, Nick. This is what. So this has been evident with Bernie for a while. I just didn't see it, and now it's obvious for the entire squad. And Bernie Sanders himself, that this is actually the case, that they've been, well, let me see. No, you say you don't change the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party changes you, right?
Yeah. That's just it, is that, as much as we can criticize, and this is something that I really wanted to share with folks on your show, is that I think that for a long time there was kind of there was like a vow of silence. I've heard Chomsky use that term before, around criticizing Bernie and around criticizing, other members of the progressive movement, but particularly him. And I think that now that's changing. I think you played a large role in that, Jimmy, and I think that's, frankly, something that the movement is, really in your debt for. Because it's not healthy. It's not healthy to, change and improvement and growth as a movement requires introspection. It requires us to think about what's working and what isn't. It requires us to hold each other accountable. And if we're not doing that, then we're stagnant, or we're repeating strategies that just don't work, And so this doesn't mean that, necessarily pointing, critiquing an action of someone. People can be so black and white. And, it's critiquing an action that someone takes doesn't mean that you hate them or that you oppose everything that they stand for or that you don't want to see them win. I would like to see Bernie unsuspend his campaign.
Me too.
And replace Biden. But I can hold that simultaneously, not, mutually exclusively, with the criticisms that I have of him and his campaign.
So we still love Bernie, but we need to hold him accountable. There are a whole series of tweets by Nick Brana, and I'll link to the first one in the information section so you can read all of them. This is number 21. But the most disappointing part is that Bernie and Jane went along with it. They went along with Jeff Weaver and still listened to someone who is so clearly a corrupt establishment Democrat, Jeff Weaver, at the expense of this movement and the millions who are counting on it. The title of Jimmy's show is Bernie Secretly Agreed to Take Billionaire Money, says former staffer. And that seems pretty shocking on the face of it, but you need to watch this show. It's absolutely true, and it's absolutely disturbing, and we need to hold Bernie accountable for this. And yes, I'll link to this episode of Jimmy's show as well. Back to the Business Insider article, Brianna Joy Gray, Sanders' 2020 campaign spokeswoman, on Tuesday argued that it's not a moral argument to support Biden simply because he's a better option than Trump. And as I've said, in some ways he's worse than Trump. Sanders publicly distanced himself from Gray after she declared earlier this month that she wouldn't endorse Biden for president, citing his opposition to Medicare for all, canceling all student debt, and a wealth tax. She is my former press secretary, not on the payroll, Sanders told the Associated Press on April 14th. And here's the most bullshit thing Bernie has said this election cycle. Sanders added that it's irresponsible to reject Biden in the general election. Bernie, let me just say this. It's irresponsible to endorse a rapist. It's irresponsible to endorse a corporatist. It's irresponsible to endorse a racist. And it's irresponsible to endorse anyone who will give multinational corporations sovereignty over the United States government. The next section is called Other Voices on the Left Call Out Biden but Insist on Voting for Him. I'm going to say those are not voices on the left. They've given up all their bona fides right there. You can't say you're a leftist and endorse Biden. This slippery corporate slope that some of our favorite politicians have wandered onto isn't going to work out very well. We can't suck up to Mama Bear Pelosi. We can't suck up to Chuck Schumer. We can't suck up to Tom Perez. And we can't keep our committee assignments, apparently. So be it. So these other high-profile Sanders supporters and former aides who have been more compromising in their approach to Biden's candidacy are not leftists. Jeff Weaver is a crook. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, perhaps Sanders' most influential 2020 supporter and surrogate, says she wants to see Biden move to the left on key policy issues. What she's not saying is that she wishes he could stop being a rapist. Ocasio-Cortez was one of the first lawmakers to offer support for Reid and urge other Democrats to take her claims seriously. I think it's legitimate to talk about these things, she said in mid-April of Reid's allegations. You can't say, both believe women, support all of this until it inconveniences you, until it inconveniences us. Us. Those of us who want to keep our appointments or our committees. Some prominent feminist voices on the left have also accused Democratic politicians and other more moderate feminists of prematurely dismissing Reid's claims and sowing doubt about her credibility. They've expressed anger at being forced to support Biden as the lesser of two evils, and they've lamented that the Me Too movement will be damaged by electing the Democratic nominee to the White House, and that Biden's feminist critics will be demonized for hurting his candidacy. I am livid that Democratic women will be called on once again to cast our vote in the name of reducing harm to the country rather than moving it forward, Jessica Valenti, a feminist author and columnist, wrote in an April 14th Medium post. The truth is that this election is going to be terrible for women no matter what we do. Rebecca Traister, another well-known feminist writer, argued that the women Biden plans to pick as his vice presidential running mate, appointed to the Supreme Court and fill his cabinet, will be tarred by the allegations against him and should be given the freedom to criticize his record. If part of the work of this election is pushing for a politics that is more just, we should be insisting on freedom for women, including those who will be asked to support Joe Biden within his party and as his running mate, to fully express themselves about the gendered and political realities in front of us, Traister wrote in New York Magazine this week. In this article by Namrata Tripathi, John Cusack calls on Sanders to unendorse Biden and reopen his campaign after New York cancels the primary. John Cusack on Monday, April 27th, called on Senator Bernie Sanders to reopen his presidential campaign shortly after New York canceled its primary election due to concerns over the coronavirus crisis in the country. The New York State Board of Elections recently announced that it was canceling its June 23rd election, which sparked an immediate backlash from Sanders supporters. The Vermont senator, despite suspending his campaign, had wanted to stay on the ballot in the remaining primaries in an effort to maximize the delegates he would be bringing with him to the Democratic National Convention scheduled in August. Cusack was among the senator's supporters who took to Twitter shortly after the announcement to warn his followers that the decision taken by New York has set a precedent for President Donald Trump to cancel the general elections in November. The actor then called on Sanders to unsuspend his presidential campaign and withdraw his endorsement of former Vice President Joe Biden. If Bernie were to unsuspend his campaign, that absolutely would put the New York Board of Elections on the hot seat. New York State canceled the presidential primaries, thus declaring Electoral College inconvenient to their political ambitions, a disastrous mistake by DNC for allowing it to happen. If the Dems intend to behave like Trump, Sanders should unsuspend his campaign immediately, the actor wrote. Cusack later in the day wrote another tweet to Women's March co-chair Linda Sarsour saying, Bernie should unendorse and reopen his campaign. New York Board of Elections just set a precedent for Trump by actually canceling an election. Bernie deserved to stay on the ballot to amass delegates. DNC was cool, Biden was fine with it. They acted unilaterally and unstrategically. Cusack later posted more tweets on Monday reiterating his calls for Sanders to reopen his 2020 campaign. He also noted that Democrats in New York were not being honest about the safety of voters amid the coronavirus pandemic when mail-in voting is an option. The actor's statement echoed the one made by Sanders' campaign in response to New York's decision to cancel its primary election, and which called the decision a blow to American democracy. The New York primary, originally scheduled for April 28th, had been pushed back to June 23rd because of coronavirus concerns. Although the primary has been canceled, voting for the congressional and state-level race on June 23rd will continue as planned. If you've been watching this show, you know that it's a total crock of shit what they're trying to do in New York. So if you're a Twitter person, feel free to retweet Nick Brana's and this one too. We can't safely march and protest, but we can Twitter storm. Tweet directly to @BernieSanders and @SenatorSanders and demand a Bernie refund, #BernieRefund, if he won't, #unendorse @Joe Biden, and #unsuspend his presidential campaign. It is immoral to endorse a rapist. I believe Tara Reid. What we've seen when hashtags trend on Twitter is that the lefty pundits grab a hold of it, and then after that, the mainstream media pundits grab a hold of it. We want this to be in Bernie's face. We want this to be in Biden's face. We want this to be in the squad's faces. We want this to be in the DNC's face, in Tom Perez's face, in Chuck Schumer's and Nancy Pelosi's faces. If we go apeshit on Twitter about this, we will make a difference. So even though it's not safe yet to pile into the streets, let's pile onto Twitter instead.